Hi, this is Mrs. DeWitt, and this video will show you how to accurately put error bars on a bar graph or line graph on Google Sheets. Most of the time we'll be doing bar graphs. All right, so already in front of me, I have a bar graph that I have graphed from some data from a previous AP Biology experiment. And so if you still need help with graphing or functions in Google Sheets, go watch those videos. We're going to jump right in. So standard error, remember, helps us figure out how significant our data is, if it's meaningful or not. And it takes into account how spread out the data is away from the mean. That's why it's called standard error of the mean or from the average. Also taking sample size into account. And so in this case, our sample size is our number of trials that we did combined as a class. And then we have all of those numbers there. So whenever we want to edit charts, we're going to click on these three dots, go to edit chart. And that brings my chart editor up. We're going to go to customize. We're going to go to series. And we are going to select dry first. I just want this one bar because I've already used Google Sheets functions to calculate my standard error, and my standard error is different for each variable. Very rarely will your standard error be the same. So we need to edit these one at a time. So I'm going to double click here. Okay, you can bring me the series. I want dry. And see here, it says error bars. Okay. For some reason, error bars auto set to percent. We want them as a constant, okay? This already says 0.93 and normally wouldn't because I already made error bars and then deleted it. But I calculated this using my standard error equation, which is standard deviation divided by square root of the sample size. And I went ahead and had Google Sheets do that for me. Okay. So what this is doing is this is saying, okay, my number of average worms in the dry environment was 9.13. Okay. After I calculated standard error, I realized it was within reason for that to go up 0.93 or down 0.93. So this is what I have added here. I've added that error bar that shows if it's reasonable to assume that can be within this range, even though 9.13 worms was the average. Okay. Now let's do none. So I've clicked on none. Here's the series. I'm going to click error bars. Okay. There were only 5.67 worms on average in the none environment. And I calculated this to be 0.80 for my standard error. Again, you need to calculate standard error first before you can use Google Sheets for it. Okay, again, this went in as a percent. I want a constant. I already have this typed in because I had already typed it in. You're going to have to type it in. And now this shows the bar going up 0.8 from the average, which is 5.67, and down 0.8 from the mean. Standard error of the mean. And again, mean means the same thing as average. Okay, let's do this one more time. Click on the yellow one. This is wet. Error bars. Change this to constant. And again, my value already pops up there because I already typed it in earlier, 0.73. Okay, so now I have my accurate error bars. Let's just watch what happens when I put in the number 2 here. Wow, that's fun, right? And so, oops, I clicked that by accident. So we can see now it's going up and down by 2. All right, that's a really big standard error of the mean. That means our data is not very reliable. If it's 0.2, it goes to really small. Data is super reliable. Almost everybody got the same number. Okay, we can put in 20 and it'll go all the way off the graph, right? The graph will even have to adjust for it to fit. Doesn't even make sense. And so that is how you put error bars onto a graph in Google Sheets. Now I want to show you one problem people often run into. See how each one of these was its own series? Okay. Sometimes when we graph, I'm just going to graph this exact same data table. I'm going to go to insert chart. Comes up with weird stuff. Let's do a bar graph. Okay. But here's the first rendition of this bar graph before I edited it. Okay. Notice when I click on these, all right, it only says column 1. I can't edit them individually. That would be a problem for error bars because it would give me only the option to put the same error on every single one of them. And that's not going to work because each one had its own standard error of the mean. So how you get around this is you go to setup. This is a trick that anytime you run into trouble with graphing on Google Sheets, play around with this button, the switch rows and columns. See that when I click there, it kind of delinks these and now they're separate columns. And you can see this nice little legend pops up. Now I can edit these separately. So now I can see the error bar is only here. And then I can also edit, right, none, and put in a separate error bar, right? Then I can edit the yellow one. Okay, so again, one more time, that was under setup and switch rows and columns. So if you're having trouble editing each one separately, click here. Okay. Error bars are most commonly found on bar graphs. Sometimes they are found on line graphs, and so you can add them to line graphs as well. It's a little more challenging using Google Sheets. So if you're using Google Sheets, you could just use a bar graph. And then lastly, just to apply this to how does this help us analyze our data? Okay. See how here we have our error bar. And here we have our error bar. The lowest value of the standard error, okay, is still pretty high above the highest value of the standard error for this next one, okay? We call this, they don't overlap. So you can like easily move my cursor back and forth between here and the data doesn't overlap. What this means is my average here and my average here, standard error also takes into account how spread out the data is and my sample size. And it says, okay, reliably from this experiment, most of our data landed between here or landed between here. And since they don't overlap, we can say with confidence that the worms preferred the dry environment or traveled more often to the dry environment than the none. However, since we see overlap, see how my cursor overlaps here between the standard error for none and wet, and see how this average is pretty close together, okay? So you could say, well, slightly more went towards none, but now because we have standard error, we know that this is not significant. It's not significant because this error bar overlaps with this error bar. So we know that even though slightly more went towards none, taking into account our spread outedness of the data and our sample size, it's really not significant. And we cannot claim with evidence using statistics that they preferred the none environment over the wet environment, vice versa. But we can claim, because of statistical significance, that they prefer dry to both. So that's how to make our error bars on Google Sheets and how to interpret them. And I hope that was helpful.